Happy Sunday, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Try, as always, joined by Andro, Guildmaster of RTM, and today we have a very special guest host. You know him, you love him, the Convoke Master 3001. Everybody wave to Cole. Hi, Cole.
Hello, Cole.
Thanks for tuning in
Welcome to the
Hi,
party.
everybody.
to episode 9 of Officer Chat. Today we're asking the very important question, are you ready for raiding? Um, as I compiled this information, I wasn't sure I was, which is probably not a great place to be. Uh, this came about. Go ahead.
Did you have the achievement?
Yeah, I do, like several of them. So I feel pretty confident that I'm speaking from a place of authority here. So, um, we did. We've been having a lot of conversations in guild, and this subject kind of arose out of us having some difficulty in our own progression fight, and I've had a lot of external kind of communication with a lot of the raiders, and been speaking specifically with Cole, who, like me, is very interested in creating opportunities for people to learn. Um, Not from a place of ego, like we're so smart, you have to do it our way. Obviously, you can learn from me, but just I've been around the block more than once. There are some opportunities for us to just shore up on the basics, and from that, this was born. I just wanted to put together a basic guide, not targeted at anybody in guild, but just for anybody who's thinking about getting into raiding. That was a long time ago. Andrew and I had that dream of like, why don't people raid? For us, it was never hard to get into a raid group or find it, and like social anxiety aside, which that I can't control, a lot of the times it was simply a matter of just feeling too intimidated to approach that kind of content. And there's really no reason to. So we're going to go over just some simple basics, some fundamental philosophies, and a basic, pyramid hierarchy of raid preparation, and talk with these guys who've got a wealth of experience and knowledge, and see if we can make it something that someone who has never done it would be comfortable approaching, and even somebody with a little bit of experience can, you can always improve, right? So, starting with that, I have this experimental idea that I've been playing with, that there's a pyramid, a foundation on which we can build a better raider. And I think for me, the bottom of that pyramid is knowledge. When I say knowledge, I mean understanding everything there is to know about your class, learning about fight specifics, learning about mechanics, learning about interactions. And so I think it has to start there. If you're interested in raiding at all, whether it's LFR or raid leading Mythic, everybody who started had to approach this lack of knowledge. You have to understand. For the people who are the most successful, for someone like Cole, there is no spell in the spell book that he doesn't know. No one says, hey, do you know about Shadow Meld? And he goes, shit, let me open up my spell book here. That's not even on my bars. Um, so I think understanding that is paramount. Now, everybody's going to approach that differently. I wouldn't hate advocating for something as simple as just in-game, open the spell book, read through every one of those abilities. Some of them are going to seem, that doesn't apply to me at all. When would I ever use this ability? Others will be like, oh, this is obviously a core rotational ability that needs to be number one on my bar. But you should at least understand that you have all of those options available to you. And the reason that's important, I think, is because when the raid and counter designers build their raid, the assumption is that all of these tools are available to the people participating in that raid. And so if you're a Venthyr, and a monk, and you don't have a way to get across a vast distance, like, if you can't close 30 yards in less than a second, and you throw your hands up and you're going, oh, this fight is impossible, why would they do this? Because you were given the tools, technically. And it's hard. It's like my least favorite kind of D&D game, where people don't want to use all of the items that they've gotten between levels 1 and 9 in the big level 10 showdown with the big bad evil guy. The raid encounter was designed with the understanding that all of these tools are at your disposal as a player, and so if we literally don't use those tools, we're making it harder than it has to be on ourselves. So in that vein of thought, let's start with Cole. How do you approach the fundamental basics of raiding in terms of knowledge, character knowledge, fight knowledge, whether you're playing a new class or just approaching a new raid tier? What does your process look like? Talk us through that.
It's a little different as a healer, I would say. Since most of the time it's just staying back and healing everybody. Um, but it's positioning for us, I would say. We have to be close to everybody, but also not putting them in danger if there's like something, say, where we have to be feet.
Hmm.
You don't want to be stacked on somebody unless it's a raid mechanic. Okay, we need to stack. So I would say the beginning would be knowing where you're standing and what the abilities are for the raid boss. That way, I mean, if you know you're going to have to avoid something, you're prepared for it.
Hmm. Do you
Um,
go through the process of like reading an encounter journal or a wowhead? Do you go on the beta and prepare for bosses? I know like a lot of times like our guild specific strategy isn't usually going to be ironed out until kind of we get in there and do a couple of pulls, but like there are basic mechanical understandings where regardless of where you're putting the puddle, sometimes it's nice to know that a boss has a puddle mechanic. Um, do you like to just do that stuff, see it the first time, and then make adjustments, or do you do any kind of like research and preparation ahead of time?
uh, no, so all the time I'll be looking at that boss, watching what they're doing. So that way I know what the spell that I'm looking for looks like.
Hmm.
So I'll just keep rewatching and just kind of seeing what they're doing and how they're dealing with the mechanics. And then when we're, well, not during the raid, but before we raid, I like to go into the book and see, okay, what does this much damage? Does it do a knockback? Does it stun? Does it hold somebody in place?
Hmm.
I like to read in the dungeon journal too.
Yeah, and like rereading over things uh really helps me. Like you can read through this huge guide that's multiple pages the first time and like, oh yeah, uh-huh, I understand that. And then you see it and you run something or you play your character or you have an issue somewhere or you know, you see something that maybe like feels like you should do differently and you just go back over that whole guide again and somewhere in there like your mentality's changed where you're looking to solve a problem now and somewhere in there is going to be a solution to that problem
For sure.
either because you were missing something or because you didn't understand how something worked right or whatever.
Yeah. And like I don't want to jump ahead in our bullet points, but sometimes just even just learning what you've done wrong, like not even necessarily coming at it from a perspective of how do I play perfectly, but just understanding what killed you is sometimes helpful. Um, it's not uncommon for me to have I have a little pad of paper here on the desk beside me, and like sometimes even as the raid leader, even as someone who has spent hours rehearsing this and reading about it and practicing, something will happen that I did not expect, and I am just as a tank dead, and I'll just go to the what killed me, and it'll be an ability that I did not give any credence to or never bothered to commit it to memory because it didn't seem like it was ever going to be a factor. I jot that down. We do another couple of pulls. Next time we take a break, look it up, figure how I got trucked by it, and how that's never going to kill me again. Um, there's in that same vein of trying to learn a fight, you also have to learn your character. Sometimes not necessarily all the specs, but at least the spec you're going to be raiding primarily in. So in the same vein as prepping for raid boss fights, do either of you guys have any specific strategies for like just becoming knowledgeable in what your class can do? There's nothing more frustrating for me as a raid leader, a little personal pet peeve. If I go, Andrew, I need you to paralyze that guy, and I get a hold on, um, uh, one sec. Okay, did that work? Like that, it's like a little blow. It crushes my heart a tiny bit, but it's always just a tiny bit frustrating when it's like that is a not a core rotational ability. That's not going to get you any DPS, but it's a big deal. Um, you guys are two of the obviously probably most skilled players in our guild. How do you guys always? You're never caught unawares. You guys are never caught with your pants down. You're never at a loss. You're always in the right place at the right time, executing well. What does that preparation look like? Do you guys literally just stay up at night reading class guides and thumbing through your spellbook as soon as you log in every day? It didn't happen by accident, so what does that process look like? We'll start with Andrew this time.
For me, it's a lot of iteration. And that iteration builds off of like just playing the same class forever. Um, and I've been a monk tank for an entire expansion plus two raid tiers, and I think that helps with understanding what everything is. And I'm still changing things in how I play the class. Um, paralysis up until this expansion. Like I've been playing monk for a whole expansion, and paralysis was not keybound until this expansion, because even after a whole expansion, like I'm still just not good enough to get all of my abilities on keybinds and all of them right at my fingertips, and I build off of that. So when there's a problem, when there's like a blocker in a dungeon or a raid, and I need to change something, like my growth is like solving that problem and adjusting how I play the class to meet that. And it could be that, oh, something like transcendence or Zen meditation or something like that is not something that I use very often, but usually it comes up in a raid mechanic or a situation where that's super heavily valuable. And when I see those points, I build it into like the muscle memory and the skill sets. And um, and then just reading guides. Like I still go through the Wowhead monk tank guide, every couple of weeks and just see what's new and reread the things and are there different applications and all that stuff.
And Cole,
Mhm.
same question to you.
For me, I also agree with Andro. I've been playing a druid since PC, so if I didn't know my character by now, I would think there's a problem. Um, but also, I get a lot of my learning, I would say, from PvP. In PvP, it's very fast-paced, like gameplay. So you need to use your stunts, you need to use your disorients, you need to use your roots, anything that'll help you out to survive. So I would say that's where most of my survivability comes from learning to survive in arena and in battlegrounds and things like that.
So in your mind, there's value, even if we're only talking about raid. You think there's a lot to be learned by playing a bunch of the other game modes. Doing Mythic Plus will teach you lessons. Doing PvP will teach you lessons, and all of that can translate into superior raid performance.
Yes, I think that it would definitely help because, for example, right now, if there are spells that are not being used that would be used in PvP, you start learning when to use them, what to use them for, and you have to put them in your bar. You're not going to be looking at your spell book, so they're going to be already there, and then you
Yeah.
develop that muscle memory, and you're going to push that button when you know you need to use that button.
Yeah, that makes good sense. Whenever I'm approaching a brand new class, I've got a long history playing Druid, Paladin, Mage to a lesser extent, but if I'm playing something for the very first time, like Demon Hunter was not a class I really played a lot of, but I've been spending some time DH tanking, and I I am really not opposed to opening the spellbook in game for an afternoon and just literally putting every single one of them on a bar somewhere, and then trying to remap my hands and my memory to find something, whether it's in a dungeon, in a raid, to use that spell for. Because there's no such thing as a spell that's completely useless, at least not that I've found. With the maybe exception of like Mind Vision, doesn't have a tactical application yet that I found, but almost every other spell can be used somewhere for something. And so I don't hate the idea of just going out in the open world and trying to find like when can this make my life better? When can this save me 2 critical seconds? When, if I have to run, is this an instant cast spell that I can do on the move? It's not mentioned in Wowhead's rotational guide because it's obviously not a rotational ability, but if I've made a mistake and I've got to run 75 yards back to the stack group, is pressing this button better than pressing no button at all? And almost always the answer to that is going to be yes, of course it is. But you won't know that until you take all the all the buttons out and put them on your bar somewhere and figure out what they do.
Yeah, someone brought up Spectral Sight, and
Mhm.
Spires of Ascension would like to have a word with you.
Yeah, that's it. It does get used for sure. You know, they had the hallmark Kill Jaden fight where you absolutely had to have a Demon Hunter to find Illidan. But even now, there are opportunities for you to see invisible things, and it sounds stupid until the one time you're the tank that gets stunned and killed by those Larians before you have a chance to get a defensive off. And then it's like, well, shit, if I knew where they were ahead of time, this wouldn't have happened. And that's so true.
That would be
That
the
that
PvP thing too. That's where you learn to use it
Yep,
or get those pesky rogues.
for sure.
yeah, that definitely didn't happen to me yesterday.
So it's an ongoing process. I want to move on to the next section, but before I do, let's frame the answer to this in the context of a brand new raider, either just brand new to WoW or brand new to a specific class, looking to go into his first raid. What is the one piece of advice you would give him or her for becoming familiar with their class?
Ask
A
for help.
resource or a tip or a okay, yeah, you take advantage of someone like, let's say, Cole in guild and just say, hey, look, I want to play balanced druid. I understand you're the convoke master. Teach me.
Yeah, and I'd say like little things, being self-aware, like Void brought up, looking for ways to help, and asking for help is so huge. Like, what you're likely going to get if you ask for help is too much help.
Yeah, that's true.
For sure. Like going into a into a dungeon and seeing a moonkin that's better than me, and I'll be like, hey, what exactly are you doing? How did you get those numbers?
Hmm.
So ask questions, ask as many questions as you can.
And that, of course, is a theoretical story because such a druid doesn't exist. But I appreciate that. So Cole, same question to you. Like, just a one sentence bit of advice for a brand new raider or a brand new person to a class. I know nothing about the class. I know nothing about the raid I'm walking into. What advice would you have for me to increase my knowledge base?
Um, Probably fat boss. Get to know your like talk with your guild leader and see if you can come up with I don't know anything. I don't know. Sorry, I'm
Oh no,
nervous.
no reason to be nervous.
I feel like I'm in the spotlight.
I think another
Just
another
really
thing.
ask questions. Cut it short. Just ask questions. If you want to get some help with a specific thing, I
Hmm.
mean, any of us in the guild can help with anything.
That's
I
fair.
think another thing that I always say is just play the game.
Hmm.
The more you play the game, the better you're going to get at it.
Yeah, that's I really liked
Right.
Cole's idea of just play it in every facet, like get that PvP experience because then in those panic moments when your angry raid leader just screams at you, personal defensives, and I know that three or four people are hands in the air going, I don't know what that is. If you've had to fight for your life in an arena for 6 hours, you will not have to wonder what those buttons are. So there is a lot of value, even if you're not a PvP player, even if you're not looking to grind out Warlord. You just maybe get in there, spend a weekend with a couple of friends. There's always a guild group looking to do PvP. Just get in there, get your hands dirty a little bit. When you have to run for your life, I think he's right. You'll learn some stuff, and then when a situation adjacent to that happens in raid, suddenly you're going to be the guy that doesn't die, and I think that's a valuable lesson.
It does show you how to make a choice like then and there.
Yeah,
What's
for
going to
sure.
be the best outcome?
Yeah, because there's nobody in PvP giving you 10 seconds to figure out something.
Right.
Moving on to the next tier of our pyramid is information access. So we have a good understanding of what our rotation is supposed to look like. We know that in 10 seconds Shriekwing is going to scream and we have to line of sight that around a pillar, or we're going to put blood pools everywhere. We have those basics down. But sometimes knowing what's going to happen and having easy access to that information are two very distinct things. So when I say access to information, it's it sometimes comes down to UI elements. It sometimes comes down to being able to watch your health bar or cooldown timers. But lumping that all together, to be successful, you have to be able to know what your current health is and what the enemy's current health is. You need to be able to track your own mana. You need to watch boss ability cooldowns. You need to be able to watch your own rotational abilities. Like, has Convoke just been off cooldown for 8 minutes and I totally forgot that was a button? Like, you need to be able to watch all that stuff, but more importantly, you need to be able to be aware of all that stuff while you're also participating in the fight. Like watching your feet while also watching the last 15 seconds on that combustion. And trying to organize your user interface in such a way where that is all very easily accessible to you. Because it doesn't do you any good if I know that I've got 14 seconds left on Bestial Wrath, but because I'm just focused in on that timer, I have stood in the fire and died. You don't get any bonus points. The boss doesn't die any faster because you were going to have perfect timing if you didn't die to the fire boss. Um, what do you guys think is the most important aspect in having easy access to that information? This can be anything like a weak aura suite that you like, something like deadly boss mods, bigwigs. How do you guys keep all of that information easily accessible? And then once we're done with that, we're going to take a look. We've actually got a couple of screen grabs of our UIs, so we can kind of dissect the good, the bad, and the ugly about those.
Yeah, I use WeakAuras a ton. So I make my own WeakAuras for a lot of stuff. I use WeakAura packs for raids and dungeons, and then DBM is obviously helpful. Um, I'm very add-on heavy, um, but even with all of the add-ons and DBM, the game just gives you that information up front. Every single major ability in Denathrius, for example, has a voice line that goes along with the initiation of that ability.
Mm-hmm.
So, listening, having your sound on, um, is a huge piece of information. And then also for um, for raids, raid leaders calling stuff out.
Yeah.
Pay attention. For dungeons, I try to do the same thing. When I'm tanking dungeons, I'm telling us where we're going to go. When there's something special that needs to happen, this is what we're doing. I'm announcing, when prides are happening. Um, Communication is a huge source of information.
And it's just you have to make sure that that
So
information is at
I
hand.
mainly use just DBM. I'm not
Go ahead, Cole.
I'm not very, very big on add-ons, which I'm actually looking at using weak auras because that showed me anything is that I really suck at tracking quaking, and
Mm-hmm.
it'll ruin my convokes. So
Yes, it will.
looking into getting that. DBM, that's pretty much the only one I use. I'm more of a visual person, um, but without things popping up at me. So I've learned to kind of see the visual cues of spells and see, okay, if a person is glowing this certain way, they still have this active, this is going on.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't necessarily recommend that. I definitely recommend the add-ons. It's much easier.
And that's another holdover from PvP, I'm sure, too, where it's like,
Yeah.
when that flaming fire mage goes brilliant orange, it's time for CC or duck and cover.
Yeah.
uh,
Use that shadow melt.
um, so I'm not advocating that everybody needs to go down and find from Wago like some mythic streamers LVUI import and just radically change every aspect of how they see the game. I guess my advice should, or I wish it had taken the shape of, you just have to have that information visible. And we'll look at UIs here in just a second, but several fairly conclusive studies have been done that there's a very finite amount of usable visual real estate when you're playing an MMO like World of Warcraft. That basically you're talking about what you're paying attention to being your character at the center, and about 4 inches of screen real estate around that character. And everything outside of that box you are only extremely, very peripherally aware of. So the idea is to, I think, try to put the stuff that's most important to you somewhere within that cluster zone where you can watch your character, watch his feet, watch where you're moving, watch the boss, and then have kind of a nice little halo of useful information at your disposal. Um, Whatever form that takes. If you want to make a weak aura for tracking something, if you want to use tell me when, if weak aura is too intimidating, I use a couple of tell me whens just to let me know when cooldowns are available again. Because I have this notoriously bad habit of like sitting on cooldowns waiting for the optimal time to use them, which may never come, especially as a tank. It's sometimes better just to keep stuff rolling. Um, so I guess maybe we'll just look at UIs for a minute, and we can talk through the good, the bad, and the ugly about some of our options here. Let's start with mine. This is going to be full screen here, I think. So here we can see I've got like my raid assist markers and my ready check stuff in the upper left hand corner, the default stock UI in the upper right, mini map upper right. I've grayed out the chat boxes for stream. I've got Voodoo grid panel upper right there. And that's all kind of information I don't want to say I don't care about, but isn't immediately important to my success or my survival. Once you get closer into that inner circle of about 4 inches of screen real estate we were talking about, you can see that directly above my character I've got DBM cooldowns. Timers that are everything that's going to happen boss ability wise in the next 10 seconds appears right there in that list. So in the graphic there you can see that Rip Soul is 2.8 seconds away from happening. So that helps me both that would help me as a tanker, as a healer, or more importantly as a raid leader to make sure everybody knows what's about to happen. But I need to be able to see that information. You can also see that I've got 2 stacks of the dog bleed dot from the little weak aura there to the right of my character. And you can see my health bar and the boss's health bar, lower left and right respectively, with buffs and debuffs on them. It is not the best at all, and then directly underneath my character, you can see that I'm tracking the Thrash and Moonfire dots, as well as all of my tanking cooldowns. So I've got 4 seconds left to Barkskin, so I don't have any Iron Fur up. I probably should have had an Iron Fur stack at that point, but you can also see that I have Incarn available as well as both charges of my Survival Instinct. So at a glance, I can see what my options are from as a tank. Like if this guy is about to truck me again and I don't have any Fury, I still have 2 charges of Survival Instincts. I still have Incarn to get back in the fight, and I can see that my Thrash is at maximum 3 stacks and ticking away, and that I also have Moonfire on the boss, which is where a lot of my DPS comes from as the tank. Um, those are the good, I think. The bad and ugly is one of the concessions I had to make moving from healing to tanking this tier is that Voodoo grid in the upper right hand corner normally would be right where my buttons are, dead center. So I have yet to find a way to incorporate. I think I need to shrink it down and move it closer somewhere, but every once in a while I will not see when someone has died, especially if they are in group 1, because that is so peripheral to my vision that I try to I'm trying to make sure that I mechanically remember that I have to glance up and left, up and left. But if I don't and someone dies, it may take me 15, 20 seconds to notice that that's happened. So that's a huge weakness of this particular UI design. And I don't love my button placement, but I think it's one of those you have to do what's best for you, what's going to work for you, what you can execute well against. And for me, this finally got to a good workable position. This is what I would consider the bare minimum for me in terms of being able to be successful both as a player and as a raid leader. This gives me all of the information I need. It's not perfect, but it's closer than it has been in the past. Do you guys have any comments, any glaring omissions from this UI example?
That's pretty similar to mine.
It's very clustered compared to
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I hate that it's so busy.
I just get the bare minimum. But then again, I don't tank, so I don't have the need for a lot of these tanking add-ons that you'll use.
But I think the core lessons are there that everything that's important to me for that fight as a tank or as a raid leader is really in that sweet real estate spot just within 4 inches of my character. Cole or Andro, who wants to go next?
You can do mine. Mine's cool, right?
It is cool. Let's take a look at Andro's UI here. So talk us through what we're looking at. And the picture does a fine job of that, but
Yeah. So the core stuff, right? My rotation is always in the center, a lot like yours. I have a lot of information on the rotate. Like the biggest things for my rotation are I want to be able to easily what I should be doing to pop out at me. So I have most of my abilities go into a mostly transparent alpha when I should not be using them, and I always just know kind of what button I can press if I need something. I've got my major cooldowns, Celestial Brew, Purifying Brew, that kind of stuff, and just kind of information about those. Player and target frames are similar to yours, and those are mostly you don't want to have to be moving your eyes all the way up to the top left corner of the stock UI just to see what your health is or what what your target's health is. So I bring those closer. Frames, this is one thing that I do very differently than most people. My raid frames, I have separate sections for tanks, healers, and then I have the standard big block of everybody. And that helps me prioritize when somebody dies, how important that is. So it's one thing to see that somebody dies, but if you have to read their name in order to understand what role that person was in, then that's wasted time, that's wasted thought. So when a healer dies, there's a healer column, I can immediately see that. So that's often when I'm calling out reses instead of John, it's because I have faster information about whether it's a tank or whether it's a healer who died, whereas the DPS, not my problem kind of thing.
You've brought this on yourself.
I use, on the right hand side, self status and co-tank status, those are weak aura add-on packs that are similar to DBM, but focused more on like what you as the player need to be doing for mechanics. Um, so it'll show me what dots I have, what, whether or not an ability is coming up that's going to tell me like move or spread or stack or something like that. I get pretty numb, visual numb to those, except for the tank ones. There's a co-tank status, which is the question mark icon, which is basically the same information but for my co-tank. So if I'm tracking dots on a tank swap, then I also see that information for Tribrid. And then getting even more custom, just to the left of my player, I will put as we go through fights and as we learn where challenge points are and where things like I want this to be as easy as possible for me to remember and keep track of. I'll put specific boss abilities there. So super close to my character. Um, the one that is showing there is Denathrius's frontal cone that he does. So I'm constantly watching that timer to know when I need to get somewhere by. I don't have to look at the timer's bars and filter through that to see. I usually get pretty visual numb on the timers. What I often do for raid tiers is strip out all the timers that I don't care about. As a tank and let Tribrid or somebody else deal with, things that aren't going to kill me or cause me to wipe the raid.
Yeah.
And I like things small. It's like with everything up, it's pretty cluttered. I'm probably going to actually remove the timer bars and figure out something else to do with that. But otherwise, seems okay.
Yeah, I like the simplicity of it. I wish mine was a little less cluttered, but sometimes I just feel like I need all of the information, which is kind of inescapable when I'm raid leading. But the weak aura that you gave me that shows me like the co-tank status, that's been very helpful. And every once in a while, like especially on Council of Blood, I will sometimes just like tab taunt the wrong target, and I don't necessarily see it right away until like, oh shit, he's at 3 stacks of the Nicholas debuff. I have made a mistake and need to correct that immediately. And so that's actually been really helpful for me.
Yeah, I always use that as like a good opportunity to recognize where things are getting chaotic and maybe there's like either too much stuff going up on the screen or I need to focus on something more.
Mm-hmm.
It happens early in a tier and we get a lot better at it.
Yeah, well, like the first time we did Denathrius as a tanking team, you were like, you just took the frontal cone. I'm like, how does he know that? But I imagine because it showed up right there on the tanking screen that now I also am debuffed. So good job, idiot. um, any thoughts, Cole? Anything that you dislike or would improve about this UI, or is this kind of what you'd expect from someone who's doing tanking?
Yeah, I think it's exactly what I would expect from somebody that's tanking. I feel like it's also very similar to what I see on like Ben's UI.
Mm-hmm.
Y'all keep track of all this extra stuff that personally I don't have to keep track of, but it really is helpful when somebody does know it. And I should probably get these add-ons to be fair, and keep track of that as well. Just if he can't call something out or if y'all can call something out, I know that it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one thing that I'm really big on is like you get numb to visuals, right? So when there's always a timer running, you just get numb to that and you don't look at it anymore and you miss something. So I like stuff that goes away and pops up, like becomes visible when it's important, so that I know if there is a timer right in that timers box, it is something that I care about because I've decided I care about it, whatever reason that is. Um, for big abilities like back in the day Mechatork, right? I had a box that was like a quarter of my screen big. Every time that his frontal cannon went off, 5 seconds before that went off, a ginormous icon came up on my screen, and we never missed a call.
Yeah.
You can't get numb to that, right? So those are the things that I like. I look for opportunities for. That's probably going to happen with Massacre on Danny.
Yeah.
I'll get that icon going, and yeah, those are the things that help me. I get numb to even the boss ability icons. I will get numb to that. I have one for the lines on Hungering Destroyer, and there is so much going on in that fight from a survivability perspective for
Yeah.
tanks that I miss it. The box is on my character and I can't pay attention to it.
I had to move the weak auras, the Nathria weak auras box to like on top of my Bearhead in that fight, just because I was missing line callouts, and that will wipe a raid if I'm not. I mean, yes, agreed that everybody should be on top of that themselves, but like my job is literally to remind people to do that. And when I miss like 3 calls out of a fight and we have 6 dead people, that is exclusively my fault. But like you're saying, there was just so much going on when we were struggling just to survive his tank buster that I would forget. So you have to make like that, yeah, literally a box twice the size of my character that appears over my head that just says beam with a 5-second countdown to when he does his lines of destruction, and that helps. Like I don't miss those calls anymore, and it sounds stupid, but that's what it took for us to get that boss dead. So you have to be willing to, I think, I don't want to call them compromises, but make those on the fly adjustments to this isn't ideal.
Yep.
I don't want this here forever. I hate the way it looks, but I need it to be successful. So let's take a look at Cole's UI here, and it is more minimalistic, but he's also not a tank. And just talk us through here. Yeah, you're successful, so this obviously works for you. My first thought is that is a lot of buttons.
Yes, as a druid, y'all know we have a lot of spells. So my first bar actually changes. I have to where every time I shift into cat form, the first bar changes to cat form spells, bear form, and so on. The one that never changes is the second one. That's all my CC things, my shadow meld. Normally it would be on the first button, but because I'm Coltira now, I have that stun. Um, any kind of cooldown that I need for myself or for somebody else and things like that. Like I guess utility would be on the second bar.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't have much of a need for some of the add-ons that y'all have because I see everything through Voodoo. And then also, I guess I would like to point out that as a healer, I think it's easier for me to not need a lot of these add-ons because as a healer, you get to see everything. You're not constantly mashing buttons. You're not. Your face is not in some bosses' butt. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like you always have visual of everybody and everything, so it's easier for me to see, to have those visual cues just from the game itself. For example, um, Remornia, when she's gonna do um, the lines that we got to move out
Massacre.
of,
Yep.
you always see her float away. I don't know if most people even pay attention to that, but she floats away, disappears, and that's how you know, oh, it's happening. I got to keep watch for these lines. Other than that, I don't have much. I like my UI to be very simplistic, just so I have more area to look at.
Yeah, that's. I
Also,
mean,
that helps me with my positioning. It's like, okay, I can move here because this area is covered.
exactly. That would be my only like. I am super jealous of how beautiful all of that screen real estate is. Like, I think I would need to add a few things more, like you're saying, to be good at my job. But like just looking at that as a player, I am very very green with envy because that, like you're saying, I would be able to watch Remornia fly away. I would get to watch the boss abilities instead of having to rely on a lot of like this onslaught of textual based data to make those determinations for me. We had a question in the chat for you. What is the UI system built on? Is this an LVUI setup or is this just like bartender? How are you accomplishing that look?
It's the Razor Naga, uh, like
Hmm,
keybind. I mean, UI. So that's the only difference that I have. That's the
nice.
only thing that actually alters my UI. It's just the Razor Naga.
And the grid-based system, that's Voodoo, right? It looks familiar.
Right.
Okay.
And then that also is next to my character, so I can have everything written in there. Like
Oh,
you said, within that visual box.
exactly. I was just gonna say that. Like, and do your Voodoo tiles, when you have 5 or more people, do they build down or do they build out to the left or to the right? Are they vertical or horizontal tiles?
Uh, they build up to the right,
Okay.
and it's always set up like by the group. So I think it goes 5 down and then spreads out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Void had a good question about like what our key bindings set up. So like I use 1 through 5 QERF
Let's go back to
and
this while
then
you're discussing.
ASDW to move. But I also have see if you can see this. So
Yeah.
it's like a Razer Naga mouse, but it's modular. So I can move the buttons around. and I have different sized buttons on the side of my mouse that with shift keys I bind a whole bunch of stuff to as well.
Okay. Cole?
For me, I use buttons 1 through 12, shift 1 through 12, control 1 through 12.
Nice.
And then it's all located on my mouse as well. I don't know if you have
That's coming through.
buttons on the side, and then I have the ones on top as well. For my druid, shifting is so much easier and faster using the scroll wheel. So up would be bear, down would be cat form, shift up would be blight form, shift down would be tree form, just for fun.
Nice. I like that. Yeah.
But yeah, everything is bound just to my mouse.
And Tribird's a freak of nature. Why don't you tell people how you use your keyboard?
I have a unique. Sorry, Destiny just came over to talk to me. I am a freak of nature. If you're looking at my screenshot here, my UI, I am a left-handed gamer, like tried and true. My left hand is my mouse. I use the numpad and control numpad, so like 1 through asterisk, and then control 1 through asterisk are these two vertical blocks left and right, and then the 3x2 grid just above those is my mouse. Let me, I guess, probably hide this so you can see my mouse. Sorry, guys. It is just a Logitech gaming mouse, but it's got those 4 shoulder buttons, and it lets me make one of those the control button. So from my left hand, one of those becomes control button, and the other 3 are Vortex, Incap Roar, and Typhoon when I have it, and then mouse wheel up is Stampeding Roar, mouse wheel down is Interrupt. But it's all about, I think, just finding something that works for you and that visually reminds you of what you're doing. So we've talked a lot about access to information. There's one other aspect of that I would like to just touch briefly on, and that's the post-mortem information, which I think has a lot of understated value. We run raid logs all the time, and sometimes I think there's a lot of utility that we're missing out on, or a lot of value to be earned, and just going back and looking at your performance in a raid log, even if you don't want to plug it through an analyzer tool, which is again also very helpful. But just even if you're coming at it from a perspective of this is a 5-minute fight, which if I have, it helps you figure out how many cooldown usages you have. If you have a 2-minute cooldown, can you get a third use out of that? Almost certainly every time. If the fight's running 5 minutes and 41 seconds, you could conceivably plan on having a second potion in that fight. Where if you don't pre-pot in the beginning and you're going to save your potion for a phase 3 heroism, that's a different story. But looking at the logs, posthumously, I think there's a lot of value in learning just fight times, or the worst case scenario is, what did I die to? Like, what is everybody dying to? If you're the healer, like, oh my god, there's this phase in the fight where I am just non-stop spamming heals. What is going on there? Being able to look at something like the World of Warcraft logs, I think, is very helpful to sort of dissect that information. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I always look at raid logs to try to figure out what we're having issues with, right? So if there's a specific mechanic or a specific phase, or an assertion that we're making that this is the way, this is what we're having trouble with, like in the moment of the fight, then is that actually true? And yeah, the potion thing is a great example. I actually today, kind of looking at the logs before Danny, I was looking at potion timings and what we could potentially do there. So I kind of use logs as a way to make sure we're really understanding problem points.
Mm-hmm. And it also allows us to have, like, when we make those kind of confidently... Oh, go ahead, Cole. Go.
I personally don't have much of an input on this. I tend not to look at logs too much. I probably should, but...
Oh, so do you run... I saw that you
something
had...
I should do, yes.
You had, like, details, I want to say, maybe, as, like, a in-game sort of meter. Do you rely on that sort of in-between pulls, or even during a pull, to sort of look at your healing output or damage taken?
Right, and looking if we can dispel their spells. For example, what's that fight with Nicholas?
Oh, the Blood
like
Council.
looking for
Yeah.
the
Hmm.
for the yeah for the blood council, looking for the dispelling the enrage and stuff.
Hmm.
I'm always keeping track of that. Who's
Yeah.
dispelling? What's dispelling?
Yep. I think it's important. And then I think just in summary, make a UI that lets you play the game, number one, but also have access to that vital information. You saw three pretty different examples of how we accomplish that, but I think each of us is having some measure of success doing that. So there is no hard and fast, this is the only way to do it, this is the only way you can be successful. You know, Cole's very minimalistic style works well because he's getting all those cues visually from the game, which is, I think, a great way to play, not only because it's more enjoyable, but also it's so holistic that if ever an add-on fails, he's not put out. He's not boned because of his add-on dependency. Andro and I have to be responsible for a lot more information, so I think our screen real estate tends to get a little more muddled, mine more than his. Um, but we have access to everything that you could ever possibly want to know about that fight at a glance, and we can access that information hopefully without wiping the raid to have to peek upper right or upper left or whatever. So you have to find what works for you, but look at it in a way that I have to be able to watch my character and the fight. And then lastly, I think I think Cole, I don't know if he said it precisely, but I think I'm going to paraphrase his point in that if you're coming at this for the first time or you're not 100% confident in what you're doing, focus on the personal responsibility aspects of the fight. He basically said, I don't necessarily need to know what the tanks are doing because I'm not a raid leader nor am I a tank. And that's actually probably a great way to really drill down on the stuff that's important to you. If he's the healer in our raid group, so if there's something that's going to require a healing cooldown, it's important for him to know what does that, when it happens, how often it happens, so on and so forth. But there is a bunch of other aspects like that is not relevant to him, and so being able to sort of parse that out, I think, is also important for that access to relevant information is keeping it salient to the job you're doing. Between roles, or once you're finally the raid leader or the guild master, like then sure broaden your horizons to be responsible for all of that information. But I think keeping it concise and accessible is important too, so that you're not overwhelmed. And you get that signal to noise ratio that Andrew was talking about, where if you just put every single DBM timer up on your screen, after the third pull, it just becomes white noise. You go back to not watching it anymore at all. So if you can find a way to just make the two or three things that are super important to your job in that fight noticeable, relevant, and front and center, that's what's really the important takeaway there. Let's move on to the third pillar, which is player skill. And that's hard to quantify. But that's why we wanted to have Cole here today, because everybody that plays with you agrees, wow, he is a skilled player. He's a really good druid, whether it's healing or convoking. But like, how do we get there as people? How do you get there as a player? Does that translate from spec to spec? It's not as important in my mind as being able to, at a glance, have access to the information that's relevant to you or having a broad understanding. But let's define player skill, drill down on that a little bit, and talk through it. I think, in my mind, the truly skilled, and I'm doing air quotes there, players are ones that make a job look effortless, right? When Cole decides to DPS a key, it doesn't look like he's struggling. There's not stutter steps. There aren't, I have to think about what button I need to press next. There's not a lot of lost downtime. And that doesn't come from luck or he's playing an overpowered class. That's hours and hours and hours of practice. I think a big part of skill is muscle memory and confidence. It's knowing that you have the answer to any situation before it happens. I think that's important. So let's talk through that a little bit. We'll start with Cole, since you're sort of my primary example here. How did you get to a point where everything kind of feels like second nature? Your pristine screen real estate there is only valuable to you because you know where all of your buttons are and what all of your buttons do and when you're going to have to press them. I don't imagine your eye line gazes down at that keyboard a lot. So talk us through that. Like, how do I get to be that good?
Play. I would say don't be afraid to try things. I'm going to use Shadow Meld as an example. Do things for science. Experiment. PvP, I would say, is a really good teacher for a lot of things. That doesn't mean going to battlegrounds. It could also be just turn on war mode. And even though it feels like you're losing a lot, to me, you pick up a lot of really good skills from them. I don't
Y-
know, I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, a lot of it is and like seeing where things aren't going well and trying to get better at them. And if you do that enough, you're going to try 40 different things and then one of them's going to work and you put that in your toolkit and now you're better.
Hmm.
And you just do that for years, like years and years and years and years and years, and then eventually you're a good player.
Yeah, and so like just to dovetail into that a little bit, part of what makes it seem effortless and what makes Cole and Andro seem so skilled is that they're good enough at doing the fundamental basics of their class without having to focus on that, which frees up some of that mental bandwidth to watch other things. Cole will often voluntarily call out information like, "Oh, we've got mobs coming in from behind us from the south side," and it's like, "Holy shit, I didn't even see that. How is he seeing this?" And it's because for him, running that DPS rotation in a key, or managing to blanket rejuve the group and then wild growth just before that damage comes in, that's something he's already committed muscle memory to. That's knowledge in the bank. He's done with that. Doesn't have to think about that. So now he can free up some of that high processing bandwidth to look at the fight, to look at the mechanics, to look at boss timers, to read the room, to look at other people's health. When he's reminding other healers to check their mana, he doesn't. You saw he doesn't have an add-on that's telling him, holy shit, Sumi's going to be out of mana soon. We need a mana tide totem. It's because he's comfortable enough and familiar enough with his class and spec that he's freed up some of that mental bandwidth to really focus on what's going on around him. And I think that's one of those keys when you're like, I don't remember the exact quote, but it's, yeah, whenever someone's really great at something, that's what makes it seem effortless. Um,
I will say something that I really feel helped me push through that wall. I'm going to call it a wall. Was when I got like this mouse that has the extra buttons. I used to have such a hard time because I used to look at spells and cooldowns all the time. I was just looking at my bar. Nothing else had my attention. And then when I was able to keybind everything to my mouse, I didn't have to look at even my keyboard anymore. And that, I mean, it really did help out having other ways to do things or easier to do things. So I do recommend getting a mouse with some buttons on the side that let you do some keybinds, or even one of those little button pads thing.
yeah, a little keypad, gaming pad, never hurt nobody.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, moving on to sort of the next subsection here, there are obviously in this game classes that have a higher skill ceiling than others, and it's just the way the game is designed. I think it's a good element of game design, to be honest. Is there value in people on a case by case basis evaluating whether or not this class's skill ceiling is just too high for me? Do you think that if I like the class fantasy of playing a fire mage, but I am absolutely terrible at combustion, it doesn't resonate with me at all, I'm bad at it, do you think the advice should be just combust 1,000 times on a target dummy until it makes sense? Or do you think there's some value in just saying, look, if that doesn't jive with you and you don't feel comfortable doing it, check out Frostmage? It arguably has a slightly lower skill ceiling, and maybe you're going to be more successful there.
Yeah, I think like Fire Mage is a good example because it is a highly complex class. I think everybody can do well at any class. Like that is the balance that Blizzard has. And then there are classes that have skill ceilings to the freaking moon, like that are just so complex. And to get that extra value, you have to be an extremely skilled player. But even Fire Mage, like, um, you know, figure out the simple rotation and play the simple rotation and start like improving. And you can do that on a target dummy, or you could do it in a dungeon, or you can do it in PvP, or you can, each has its own value. The dungeons are going to give you some experience on the cycling and when you should be using it. PvP is going to tell you like how do you use it when stuff is going sideways and totally wrong and everything is against you. And just doing that over and over and over again, just play and play and play and play. If you drive with a class like the play style, then just play it. But there is that aspect of like there's some classes that just don't agree with me that I can't wrap my head around, and like they just aren't fun. So to me, so I'm not going to play them because they're not fun for me.
It's like I think if you're close to that skill cap ceiling, then definitely work on it. like my own personal struggles. I've been playing a lot of Balance Druid and Keys, and I'm a boat, balance of all things, balance guy. And so like the recommended, best case scenario is basically to never overcap Astro Power, which we all agree is a huge DPS loss. That's a big no-no, slap on the hand. But to also have enough pooled so that as soon as you cap over to that Eclipse state, you can fire off 3 Astro Power while you have that huge, crit increase from boat. And I struggle sometimes. I'd either know that I've overcapped by like 20 AP, or I only have 75 Astro Power, which is only 2 of those Star Surges into that high crit window. So like for me, I think that's in what I would call an agreeable state. Like I'm close enough to that skill ceiling where if with a little bit of practice and a little bit of hard work, maybe even an add-on tweak, I'm going to get better at that, and that's something I can overcome. I had recently leveled a BM Hunter and did not understand the value of making sure that that frenzy stack stays on my pet, and couldn't figure out why my damage was so low. And for whatever reason, that seems like a very simple thing to maintain, and maybe my crit was too low. There could be a lot of factors here, but I walked away from it. Like I'm done playing Hunter. I felt like that was just more work than I wanted to have to do, that one little bad luck in RNG and my stacks fall off. But you watch, Shaylin or someone like that who's very good at BM, they make it look effortless. But I just realized that wasn't for me. Like that was a level of micromanagement I wasn't prepared to play with, and so for me, I think I just walked away from that spec. And I think there's some value in being that self-aware. Like even if it's just switching to marksman, a different spec within the same class, that might be an appropriate decision to be made sometimes. And we've said it 100 times as a group, as a team, on stream and off stream. You just have to play what works for you. It doesn't. If BM Hunter is the absolute best spec in the game, which it is not, but if it's just simming the highest, but you hate it, you're never going to get the most out of it. So I think it's always better to defer to something that you're going to enjoy and that you're going to be able to execute well playing. The other point we had in skill, unless you guys have anything to add to high skill ceiling classes versus low skill ceiling classes, I didn't mean to monopolize that.
No. Well, I think your call out of being self-aware, like skill is important and it helps, but like trying to be that 99th percentile person, or that I can eke out another hit on this mob if I'm a high skill player, like matters so little that like if you're stressing out about it, just don't even worry about it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's one of those I would much rather go ahead, Cole.
A focus, for example, trying to be that, like you said, 99th percentile. More often than not, it's really not going to make a difference. The only difference it would make is it might get you killed.
Yeah.
Which it's really not worth spending like BRS on something like that, or saving something because you don't want to use cooldown, saving a global cooldown. Like really,
Yep.
It's a little too much. You don't want to focus that much on trying to be 99%. That you're missing out on everything else, and I would consider that less skillful than doing everything else right.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you got that extra hit in, but at what cost?
Yep. We've said before too in Guild, like those 100% legendary parses almost always come at the expense of you have probably been doing something wrong the entire fight. Like unless you're a mythic raider performing at that level, odds are you have been cleaving on adds that don't take damage in a meaningful way, or you've been standing in fire, or we are under healing and people are standing in bad stuff just to pad that parse. Like generally speaking, that 100th percentile parse is kind of a lie sometimes, where you are probably not the best player in that particular scenario getting that 100th percentile parse. I would, and I've said it before, people love to compare numbers, and I know that I can't ever defeat that, but I would be thrilled if just everybody was consistently in the blue. Like as a raid leader, that is the sign of a very healthy raid to me, where nobody's dying to stupid stuff, everybody's doing mechanics, everybody's performing at an above average level for their item, above average for their item level. That's like great for me. That would be the best case scenario. It's always a little bit disheartening when someone performs gray and they're struggling to do better. We want to try to help that player out, and it's also equally frustrating, like you're saying, when somebody's at the 99th percentile and they're like, oh man, that was almost 100th parse. There's a small part of me that says I don't care. Like there, that doesn't matter to the success of our raid as a team. Like that's not relevant. But in developing player skill, obviously play the game, number one. Play the game in many different play styles and in many different situations. Obviously, super important. Being honest with yourself about what you find fun and what you can execute against, I think, is also important. The one last point that I had to make in developing a library of skills was consuming information. Read every strategy guide. Sometimes even dissenting opinions to the popular cookie cutter build can be helpful. I know that, Cole, you have played some kind of non-conventional builds in the past that you've been able to be very successful with, but if you go to, Wowhead, they will tell you, oh no sir, that is not the spec you use. But sometimes that doesn't matter. Like, sometimes things have to be custom tailored to the scenario, to the player. So read, experience everything that's out there. I don't hate the idea of watching streamers, watching, YouTube strategy guides. Just, if you can't be playing the game, at least immerse yourself in that content a little bit as you're learning to be a skillful player. See what other people are doing out there. Watch a guy who's a heroic raider and has AOTC week 1. What is he doing differently? Take a look at his logs. Every once in a while, I will take a peek at what Cole's doing. Like, if we're in a key together and he's 10% ahead of me on damage, and he has a very different talent build, I'm going to screen cap that, and we're going to figure out why later. Just don't be afraid to expose yourself to different opportunities like that.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point. Like, understanding the context around why things are the way they are is like super top tier skill demonstration. Like, when we're looking at council and doing it differently, somebody saying, oh well, this is what the guide says, that's not a high skill thought. That's not a applying knowledge. That's not trying to get better at the game. That's reading a guide and regurgitating the information. Same thing, like we talked about fire mages a lot. Fire mages will be top of the damage meters if your entire group plays in a certain way. If your group isn't playing that way, then you're going to be like, you're not going to be pushing those high DPS marks. And understanding that context and playing that context and knowing when and where and all that kind of stuff and knowing the whys is like, that's super hard. That's real difficult.
Yeah. And being able to just look at a situation and make choices that are divergent from what the cookie cutter build is that are best for you. Again, I don't want to keep putting Cole on a pedestal, but like week 1 of this expansion's release, he was experimenting with New Moon and having a lot of success with it because it was helping that Astral Power generation. Because when haste levels are that low, you can sometimes have a hard time just maintaining Starfall. Just coming up with the AP needed to Starfall on cooldown was impossible. And no guide told anyone to do that. And once he got nominal haste levels, he moved off of New Moon onto something more, I don't want to say standard, but more routinely seen. But it was like, no one was saying that. He saw the truth of the matter. He made a decision based on what was best for him in that moment and the way he was playing the game, and he was right. And you watch Teddle's stream, a week after that, and he's saying the exact same thing. Guys, until we get to 12% haste, you might want to consider New Moon. It's kind of a garbage talent, and the damage isn't great, but the AP generation, if you can play around it, is really smart. And I was like, son of a bitch! We need to get Cole on TV. he was 5 days ahead of Teddles. But it's just, I don't want to call it bravery, but it's having that common sense to just be like, okay, well, this is a Mythic Raider talking out of his ass. I don't have Mythic gear. This may not actually apply to me. If you're not in his situation, being able to just read into the honesty of a situation and say, no, I'm better off with a passive talent here because I can't manage that. Sometimes those differences are so minute that just being able to play well is better than trying to micromanage something you're not going to have the bandwidth for. All right. Anything else on player skill that we've missed that you guys feel like could be a good takeaway for people who are trying to become, and I'm going to do the quotes again, more skilled?
Nope.
Not really. I think we got it all.
Yeah. The on-use trinkets, the Meg just said, like, she doesn't use on-use trinkets effectively. And so, yeah, my advice to a player like that would be, obviously, you should probably try at some point in your skill development to learn how to use unused trinkets. But if you know that you're going to go a 6-minute fight and never once click that trinket, then taking something that's got more passive value is going to be better for you. You will perform personally better not taking that unused trinket, and knowing that about yourself, being that, we keep saying, being self-aware enough to just go, yeah, that's not for me, is fine. We are not a mythic raiding guild. We don't need people to perform at like a 99th percentile level all the time. So just getting the best you can out of what you do, that's what's important for us. And I think that
Yeah.
should be
Don't be
important for
afraid to
everybody.
do macros too.
Yeah, that's true. All right, let's move on to the last tier of Raider development then. We've got the equipment. I think a lot of people would assume that this would be far more important than it is. I think item level gear is probably the least valuable aspect of having success in a raid. It's important for sure, but I don't believe it's anywhere near as important as the things we've previously talked about. What does equipment mean? That's the gear you're wearing, gems, enchants, farming the extra Venari reps that you can buy enchants to put on those 6 slots, or buy gem slots so you can socket something on those 6 slots. It's having consumables for the raid, Vantis runes when they're called for, augment runes for difficult pulls, food, flasks, oils, sharpening stones, potions. And when I say potions, I don't just mean your battle potion, the one that's going to help you with DPS or help you with healing throughput or give you a little bit more tankiness for 30 seconds. Also just healing potions. Like, that's sometimes extremely overlooked, especially in a raid where we don't have health stones for whatever reason. If your class is one that struggles with personal defensives, every single one of us can have a healing potion. And there's no reason not to have them in your bags and to use them judiciously. Sort of summarizing that all into one little piece here, or adding to that, I guess, this is also a unique rating situation in that we have, conceivably anyway, Abyss List, which WoW hasn't had in a while. Everybody can literally compile a best in slot list of gear and where those pieces drop from. Now, yes, there will be some Great Vault, item level shenanigans that could alter that list, but conceivably, we have a roadmap to what the best possible version of our character looks like. For each of you guys, we'll start with Cole. How important is gear in your success as a raider? And what steps do you take personally to try to maximize those advantages?
It's very important. However, as you'll know, I don't follow those lists very well. I go my own route. So anything that is best on slot for me is going to say it's haste mastery. I don't do haste mastery. I don't do haste crit. So I did my own research, and I'm looking for anything that'll give me the 2 stats that I want. So I made my own best in slot list, something that'll give me the highest mastery I can get and the highest versatility I can get. That took extra work, obviously, because I had to do it myself. But it contributes to doing that high DPS or doing that high damage, that high healing, and even survivability. At least in my case, because of all that stacking verse.
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, like I was gonna say, gear for me personally is more about how can I help the healers heal me less? How can I help, taking, like we're watching Huntsman on your stream, like how can I take an extra stack of some ability before I have to start moving that dog? How can we take an extra stack of a boss ability so that we don't have to move? And the only way that we get through that is gear. But like you said, like we would gain more if we just taunted every one ability and just did it at a higher skill level. So most of that is just mitigating things that we're choosing to do in a not ideal manner. Otherwise, other than the handful of actual gear checks, which we've never had a problem with, we can clear the whole raid on 2 or 3 eye levels less, like easy, super easy.
Yeah, I think for us, we are in a position where I will still, as raid leader, continue to ask for consumables every raid, and I think we've got a strong, raid community that, in my situation, makes those available. Our guild is constantly farming. We've got the backing of several wealthy patrons who make sure we have everything that we need. But if you were to look at our logs objectively, we don't necessarily fall into that group where you need those to be successful. We're not missing a DPS check by 1%. Um, a lot of like in my personal example, a lot of our problems can be solved by tighter gameplay. But I think it's important to have those consumables available because a lot of times they do make a difference, and it is heartbreaking for me when we don't augment ruin, when we don't reflask, and we wipe at 1%. Because there's, I'm not a math major, I don't know for sure, but you will never not convince me that if all 30 people had augment ruins on, and if we had a couple of pre-pots, that 1% wouldn't have been a 0%. And so, like, from that perspective, acknowledging that it may not turn the tide in every battle, I think it's just a best practice to just always assume have those consumables available. If the raid leader decides not to use them, then fine, you just save them for next time. They're not going to rot on you, but I think it's a good practice to use them early and often.
Yeah, and all those things like are when we're talking about skill and like skill caps and how do you get better, like gear and consumables are free from a skill perspective. You just get them,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now, maybe you need some gold and maybe you have to play the game a little bit to get them, but there's no skill gap on getting gear. So, of all the things like, yeah, you have to work on skill, you have to work on knowledge, you have to work on this, you have to work on that, gear is free.
Mm-hmm.
And like playing the game more gets you more gear.
For sure. Uh, yeah, it's one of those things where it's never going to be. I think it's safe to say it could probably never be necessary. Consumables always seem like they're there to shore up weaknesses, and I don't know this for a fact. This is entirely my conjecture, but I think like when Blizzard designs their encounters, I bet you that they're not designed assuming everybody's using all of those consumables. I think that's there as a lever for holy shit, our whole raid got very poor drops this week. Can we still make progress on these bosses? And I think that's where consumables kind of come into play. Is that on a bad week of drops, if you didn't progress very well item level wise as a raid group, consumables are kind of there to close that gap. I have yet to see a fight where I felt like for us, our success or failure was entirely dependent on raid consumables. But I still think it's a best practice to use them. I still definitely want to use them. Um, it's just you put a just a backwards geared resto druid in the hands of Cole versus anybody else, completely misitemized at 10 item levels below the tier, he's still going to out heal everybody else who's playing a resto druid in that raid. And that has nothing to do with the gear we give him. Now you give him a well itemized character and raid consumables, then suddenly he gets to carry. And I think that's kind of where I like to be, is where I can have our top performers use those consumables so that they're beyond carrying their own water and they start helping elevate everybody else's performance.
Yeah, it makes up a lot for a lot of gaps, like the armor kits and potions. Like
Yep.
those types of things take a death into a non-death, and
Mm-hmm.
they take a wipe into a non-wipe, and yeah,
Yeah.
makes it easier.
All right. Let's. That is the completion of our pyramid. I think of raid essentials in terms of a hierarchy. I had a couple of notes here that don't really apply to the majority of our audience who are RTM guild members, but there's a lot of people who are looking to get into raiding, and like I said at the beginning, something that we've been passionate about is trying to make raiding accessible. I mean, we've got parents of young children who only have 6 hours a week to log in, and they still manage to make raid time with us. So for the people who say like it's completely inaccessible, you have to spend 40 hours a week playing it, this is a waste of time game. I don't think those are true, and I want to get that out there to as many people as possible, that if it's something you have 5 hours a week to do, you can probably play WoW and raid and have fun doing it. But if you have never participated in a raid, I had just jotted down a couple of quick notes on like raid etiquette. If I knew nothing about it and I managed to get into a pug and we're doing Castle Nathria today and I have never raided before, what should I be on the lookout for? Um, for me, the most important thing, and this is not just because I'm a raid leader, but I believe active listening is super important, especially in a pug, especially for your first time. Be quiet. Um, More often than not, no one needs to hear from you unless they're going to ask you a question. You don't need to say anything. actively listen to what's being said by the people around you. It will help you both learn the fight and learn the people's around you's expectation of you. So when the raid leader's going down his, if you have, not to make it quite so pointed, but if you have a very verbose raid leader who wants to talk for 7 minutes on end about all of the stuff you're about to see, do your best to listen to that, because I guarantee you he's saying it for a reason. He should probably find a way to consolidate that down into a 60-second, more digestible version. But do your best to just actively listen. And then when other people are doing callouts, just kind of familiarize yourself with what they're saying and why they're saying it. Eventually it will make more sense, but if you just start from a position of listening well, I think that's very important. What do you guys have as far as like a rating etiquette best practice?
Yeah, I think every pull's a learning opportunity, and I think who's it? Void in chat said, how do you get yourselves mentally ready to, for a hard raid, for that brick wall that we run into? And for me, it's because there's always something to learn. There have been raid fights that we kill 50 times, and I'm still learning how to do better at that fight. And that's why I do that. That's interesting to me. There's always a better place that we can be putting Danny to get more damage out. There's always a better call out that can happen. There's always, a way to iterate and improve. And I can spend all day making pulls on bosses as long as we're, we have that mentality and we're trying to get better and even if we're not getting, even if we're not making progress, like, yeah, it's rough and frustrating, but I take it on myself. Like, oh, are we not making progress because the boss isn't in the right spot?
Yeah.
Because we're not making call outs because of whatever. Great. Like, every pull is a learning opportunity.
Like you said
you
before, yeah, I like it as a puzzle.
Yeah. There's the one I like the most, was in Antorus, the healing immunity boss. I can't remember what his name is. V something. But we had cleared heroic AOTC, and it wasn't until after, during re-clears, that I finally figured out how to actually play that boss as a monk.
Varamathras.
And yeah, there you go. And just that puzzle, that, how do I take less damage? How do we improve positioning? How do we do this? I just keep doing that over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. Cole, what advice would you give as in terms of rating etiquette for someone who's never done it before, looking to do it for the first time, and they don't want to embarrass themselves?
Have a lot of patience. For example, when we are moving forward in an encounter, while it's nice to think we're going to beat this, I don't necessarily come into raid thinking that if we wipe once or twice that we're losing the game. I don't think raiding is competitive, and I feel like a lot of people take it competitive. We're not racing anybody. We're not necessarily trying to be better than anybody. We're trying to beat an encounter. So I would say just be very patient, and like Andro said, just try to learn from each pull.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you don't even get something happening to you. For example, Houston Athreus, the first, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 encounters that we did it, I never got that, the orb, or what's it called, the hunt, something hunt.
The Huntmaster?
That we had to run, yeah, that we had to run to the wall. So I necessarily didn't have to deal with it until a few pulls into. So, I mean, as we're going through the encounter, we're going to be learning stuff. So, patience. Always patient.
Yeah, that's a big one for me too. It kind of, I don't know where this fits into our conversation, but I think it might be worth a quick thought. You always, Cole, have, I think, a pretty positive attitude. I sometimes do not maintain the veil of I'm a little frustrated right now as well as I wish I could. But sometimes you seem immune to that, like being frustrated side of it. Is there, in that vein of being patient, trying to take some kind of teachable lesson away from every failure, Like, is there a secret cheat code we can put in somewhere to make ourselves more thoughtful and more patient? Like, what is your secret there?
Look out for what you can do for your group members. If you see somebody is constantly having to deal with a mechanic that they can't deal with, but you say you're a paladin, you bubbling them with BOP makes a difference.
Yep.
Use your abilities to make this fight easier for them. Not necessarily like give them a crutch, but at least while they're learning that mechanic, you can help them out. Or if you have um, that blessing of salvation, I think it's called, that reduces damage. Anything like that, just look out for things that you can do for your group members, and in the end, we all get through the finish line anyway. So
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's important to remember that this is a game. Like, you have to figure out how to have fun
Yeah.
with this stuff.
Mhm.
And like, yeah, sometimes it's stressful, but like you have to turn it into a good kind of stress. Being challenged is okay. Uh, Having it stressing you out and getting you pissed off because somebody else can't step in fire, like maybe, or can't avoid the fire. Like, I don't know, man. That's like you're turning it into not a game at that
Yeah.
point.
I think Cole
kind
touched
of
on
what
a
the raid is.
yeah, a good element too is that it rating specifically is kind of a team sport, and I think if you don't have a background in playing team sports growing up, like that's a reality check. It's I don't I've said this before. If we wipe on a boss and I turn around to some braggadocious DPS talking about how he's in the 99th percentile, I have in the past come down kind of hard and said the only metric I care about is boss kills, and right now we have 0. So I don't care what your damage was like on that fight. Now that's like a very cruel and crass way of explaining what Cole did much better than I did. It's a team sport, right? Like help each other out. If you see that we're having a problem with something, the answer rather is not to call that person out and say, well, we keep wiping because you can't not do something. Let's together as a team figure out a solution. That's why Andrew and I are often adjusting strategies on the fly. That's why sometimes we'll be tanking a boss in an entirely different position from one night to the next because we've talked, we've looked at logs and said, look, this is the way we wanted to do it. I still think it's probably better, but it's just not working for the way our group is stacking up. So we have to iterate. We have to improve. We have to figure out a way that's going to work for our team. And I think if everybody comes at it from that perspective, we're way stronger as a village, as a united front, rather than looking at it as 30 individuals who are each trying to do their best. If we look at it as we are trying to be the best team, I feel like we have a way more healthy experience that way. Yeah, trying to group think our way out of how can we solve this problem is way better than I'm doing my job right. I don't know why they can't get it together. And like not only just is that not the way to solve a problem, I think it does lead to some of that stress and some of that frustration that even I experience sometimes where it's just I want to go punch dirt for a while. It's just a game. It shouldn't be that upsetting to anybody. And if it is, like Cole's saying, figure out a way to just, make it about self-improvement. And then if that doesn't work, find it a way to just help other people. Because we'll get there. I mean, that's how we've done it every tier so far. That's how we're going to do it. This tier and every tier after it is teamwork. I don't know of any rating team that can't do it without teamwork. So I think that's basically all I had prepared to talk about. I'm sorry we ran a little bit long. I hope nobody's put out. Do we have any audience questions? Does anybody have any thoughts for us? You have the Convoke Master 3001 on the line here. While we're waiting to see if questions filter in, I didn't want to do any specific examples, but is there one shining example in Castle Nathria where there's like a big opportunity for greatness that either you guys have seen us succeed at, or whether you've watched another streamer be successful at? Is like what is your favorite opportunity for greatness in Nathria?
I Actually, one of my favorite things is how we're doing phase 1 in Danny.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things that people like may not notice or think about, but it's stuff that I think about. Where we were kind of iterating on where do we face Danny, and we kind of landed on going to that corner to corner. Just the timings were weird. It was, we had to learn that, and we did that pretty well. It only took us, 8-10 pulls to figure that out. But there was a couple of other things that I find really interesting that work well together. when we're talking about, hey, you get the charge orb and go to the wall. Well, the reason why you want to go to the wall is because I'm pulling the boss away from the wall.
Yep.
So the wall is always going to be clear of people, and we're pulling the boss away from the wall because the ads throw up, get dropped away from the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And just that iteration and seeing how things work landed on this, like, the ads are dying faster because the boss is on top of the ads, and it's just safer all around because the circles are going to the wall where nobody's standing. It puts everybody in the raid in between the charge and the circles. It was just this perfect storm of like we haven't had problems in phase 1 in
30
15 to
pulls.
20
Yeah.
pulls. Yeah. Like, it is so smooth. And now the issues that we have with phase 1 are we're doing too much DPS. Great problem to have.
Right. Yeah. That's. I wish that was every one of our problems on a fight. Was, guys, I'm sorry, it's just too big. Cole, what are your thoughts? What is like a good, just awesome opportunity for greatness in Nathria that you feel like we either have executed or could execute against?
I think I'm not really sure, but I know I've been thinking about ways we could, for example, with Danny phase 2. I know we still have a lot of people falling, getting bumped off and stuff, and there's a lot of band-aids we could put on there, at least while people look at their feet. Things like uh, the monk teleport, I forgot what it's called.
Transcendence.
Um, Transcendence. Yeah, if you get knocked off, you can get teleport back up. Or the Warlock Circle also for teleporting. Blink. It. I think we should look at spells like that, like us as individuals, and be like, hey, I can use this here. It would save me if I get knocked back. Let me blink, and that knockback is canceled. Or the DKs kind of being proactive. We could be um, on the third phase with the seeds that we got stuck in. They could use left advance. It stops you from getting knocked back or from being ragdolled. They could sit in there pretty much the entire duration, and with such a short cooldown, I mean, that could be something we could be doing as well. Things like that, using your teleports to stay in that seat or to prevent getting knocked back.
Mm-hmm.
I think that could be possible greatness and something that might help us out in that specific situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a good call out around, like, go look at your spell book and read through every single spell in your spell book. Think about what you as a player or what we as a guild are having issues with in a fight, and read through all 40 or 50 total spells and think about, like, oh, we have this soaking mechanic. Does this help with the soaking mechanic? We have a knockback. Does this help with the knockback?
Mm-hmm.
We have a one-shot mechanic. Does this help with the one-shot? And if you just do that, I think like, going back to the skill conversation, that is the direction.
Yeah, I'm looking at chat here, and Zell had, it's not really a question as much as a statement, I suppose, that there aren't any good solo mechanics. He misses, carrying the ball in Gahoon's toothy butthole phase. I hear you, but I also, to a lesser degree, kind of disagree. They just take a different shape, I feel like, in Castle Nathria, and I don't want to beat Denathrius over a dead horse because I don't want my guild to feel like I'm speaking directly at them. But, like, sometimes, honestly, the minigame of just survival is the solo soak of this raid tier. Being able to consistently watch your own health. Like, I think a lot of people have an unfortunate habit of, as soon as you're dead, to go, fucking healers, man, why can't they keep me up? And, like, I can't tell you how 100% wrong that feeling is. Like, you have to go back and look at what killed you. Now, if you spent 30 seconds at 20% health, then yeah, I agree. Fucking healers, I'll go yell at them. But odds are that wasn't the case. Odds are you were only at low health for a very small period of time during a very dangerous event. And you can avoid that by using immunities, by using health potions, by using healing pots, by being a hybrid class that can self-heal, by blowing a huge defensive cooldown, and like all of those, we go back sometimes, like every raid leader does this, it's not just me, but every raid leader will go back and look at death logs between pulls sometimes even, certainly at a break, almost always between raid nights, and see, Yeah, we had 7 deaths in a 10-second window all around a major damaging event. I can see how much healing came in versus how much damage came in, and then I can see that 0 potions were used, 0 defensives were activated, and at that point, I don't want to hear fucking healers because it wasn't them. Like it was the simple adherence to mechanics, and so I think that's kind of what Denathrius is that there's so much of that solo responsibility because there are so many damaging events. I can't assign a healer cooldown to all of them because that's just not feasible. So a lot of the onus comes on, like we talked about, being able to get yourself back on the platform if you get knocked off, being able to have a defensive banked for if you take that big chunk of massacre damage that doesn't absolutely kill you, or knowing that, I have a fire to the left of me, a fire to the right. I have to stay in this massacre line. I'm going to die. Oh, wait. I have a defensive, a 40% astral shift makes massacre not kill you, and you didn't have to go to what you thought were no other options. It's not the best use of it, but if your options were certain death or risk the massacre damage on a high defensive, that's a mini game unto itself, and it probably saved us a battle res or it saved us a wipe because you didn't die there. And that cooldown will be back up again in a couple of minutes. And then the solo opportunities, again on Denathrius specifically, because Gahun was the final boss, we'll keep the parallel direct. I think there are opportunities there for people with immunities to solo soak those orbs during damaging phases when everybody else has to bail. When he's doing his Hand of Reckoning explosion, no one else can be in those orbs, but if you're a paladin with a bubble or you're a mage with an ice block, that is your solo moment for glory. And I'm sorry that it's not as exciting as carrying a volleyball to a toothy butthole, but when you can make that orb go away while everybody else has to run for their lives, and we come back to orbs that have been soaked, that's game breaking. That turns the tide of battle. That's a kill 99% of the time. And so those are those moments of individual greatness that we talk about. Mages using alter time there as well, is like, that's not, I'm not going to advocate for that as a you have to do this, but those are those, personal responsibility moments of greatness where, oh wow, holy shit, did you just see what Destiny did there? They Trollin 2, they just triple ice blocked. Oh my god, those orbs are soaked and we didn't have to even heal the damage. Like, those are big personal moments of greatness. That's where the glory lies. That's how we'll get, progression boss kills, is when those people really kind of shine in those opportunity moments. So agree and disagree.
So somebody had a question about raid size breakpoints.
Yeah.
And in Nathria, I was thinking about it. There really aren't many breakpoints.
The only one is the orbs.
No, you still get the same number of orbs.
No, I'm saying the amount of health, though. The amount of damage that they have to be soaked is different based on raid size.
Yeah, so the raid sizing is generally linear for everything in Nathria. But what that does on a fight like Denathrius is it makes that phase even more cutthroat when you only have 10 people. Whereas with 30 people, if 2 people don't soak, you're going to be fine. With 10 people, if 1 person doesn't soak, you're dead.
Yep.
So, but pretty much everywhere in Nathria, we're only getting 3 of something. And those 3 things will happen regardless of whether or not you're 10 or 30. There's very few cases where that changes. Like the worst case that we've had recently was like Il'gynoth last year, where you hit those breakpoints and the fight just changed dramatically. But there's really nothing in Nathria. In a lot of cases, things just get harder with fewer people. Yeah,
I think having been at both extremes, having done 10 people for a lot of BFA and doing 30 people today, I prefer having 30 people. There is no linear scaling, to answer your question directly. It's not like the boss gets 5% more damage for each person above 10. But Nathria has been, I think, the most accommodating to a variable raid size. But it is more forgiving, just because there are more people. You can make mistakes. If you only have 6 DPS, you cannot lose a DPS or you're never going to make the Sludge Fist check. Where now, in a 30-person scenario, you might actually be able to finish that fight with 29. You can afford to lose 1 player at a 30-person group, or 2 people can make mistakes, and you can still win. Whereas at 10, that actually seems harder to me, because you are walking that razor's edge of everyone has to play perfectly, just because numerically the damage is only split 6 ways. So everybody has to soak. You have to put 2 people in each of those circles minimum, and sometimes that's tricky. Yeah. Yes, Cole does secretly kick puppies and cries a bunch, but he never has his camera on, and he's always pushed to talk so you don't hear it, so he always seems like a Zen master.
Yeah.
Cole, do you have any good advice for Blazer about just being chill? Like, I think that is part of your success, really, is that you're not motivated by, like, deeply visceral emotional responses. Is there a secret weapon there? Is there deep meditative breathing?
Not really. Freak out on the inside.
That was
But I would like to think going back to the whole solo mechanics. I would argue that most of the mechanics are solo mechanics, and we should think of them more as why didn't I do that instead of why didn't somebody else not do that? For example, when we have to catch the miles and we bounce twice, it's like if somebody misses it, it's like, well, why couldn't it have been me that got it?
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think that makes more of a difference, and it might be a better way of thinking in things like that.
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it. I've told the story, I'm sure, a dozen times, but in case anybody's never heard it before, years and years and years ago, I was balanced through a DPS in a raiding guild. I was not a part of leadership at all, and we were having a hard time with heroic Killjaden. If you guys remember that fight or aren't familiar with the fight, there's a number of meteors that have to be soaked, including a giant one that has to be immune soaked, and it happens a lot. And then there was an ability called Dread Flame, which required people to line up in a perfectly straight line to split the damage from the Dread Flame evenly. It was basically just a lot of damage soaking and a lot of intermissions where it just required people to line up well and play cohesively as a team, which doesn't seem that difficult, but it was a lot of it, and any one mistake probably wiped your group. We had 70 something pulls on the boss and couldn't get him down. We were barely seeing phase 2 consistently. That's where you were going, into the blackness to find Illidan in the shadows there. And one of the members of the leadership team finally had a meltdown. He literally loses his mind on comms and just says, "Fuck it. I hate this boss. I hate everything about it. You know what? I am going to soak every one of these fucking meteors. I am going to immune the first 3. I'm going to have to use my reset to get my ice block back. I'm going to soak the first 3. I'm going to stand at every fucking line, put a marker on my head. Everybody line up behind me." And we were all just kind of like, yeah, let's all do that. And then it's like, it took weeks for it to really sink in, where it was like, he's literally going to now do mechanics out of fitful rage. Like, this should have been something we were all doing on our own but to punish this boss for screwing us over so many times, I'm going to do every mechanic and I'm going to do them all right. And it's like, I guess sometimes everybody has to get to that personal point in their lives where it's like, yeah, I'm so angry, I'm going to just do the job right.
I'm so tired of dying to massacre that I'm just going to dodge the lines.
Right, exactly. And so
wait really?
Everybody has those moments where it's just like something clicks and then from that point forward, it all makes sense, I think. Like, I have never once had those thoughts again. Like, it all made sense to me from that point moving forward. I like to imagine that he feels the same way walking away from it. Like, yeah, this is perfect. That we just do the mechanics right every time, and then these things aren't a problem. But I think everybody has to hit that breaking point of just, I am so tired of dying. I'm going to be the guy that volunteers to soak both of those potion vials. Because I know that we're in the double bounce phase. I'm going to soak that one and the next one. And it's like, if it takes you being a rage monster, cool guy, sure. But that's
Trevor never breaks his keyboards.
Never. No, not one time. But yeah, it's just, I think it's funny when it takes something like that to get to that point, but I love it. It's just that it perfectly encapsulates my entire raiding experience, where eventually someone just gets pissed enough that they're going to do the fight right. What? Do we have any other questions that I missed? Does not look like we have missed anything. Does anybody else have anything for Cole? Cole does rage heal, yep. I've heard him just talk about this motherfucker. No, I think just, guys,
I'm gonna hear you so hard.
Yep. You're gonna be so sore from this healing. It's about bottling that up. It's about just playing cleanly and not letting stuff get to you. I think is his secret. Um,
Pretty much. Just enjoy the fight itself. Enjoy the mechanic.
Yeah, and
And then
Danny's
when
such
you
a
beat the
good fight.
boss, it's just so nice.
yep,
It's one of my favorites.
it is a good fight. Yes, not a question, but a statement I wholeheartedly agree with. Zell says, "Cole, start a bakery."
I
Yes,
have no experience with that yet.
that'd be pretty cool. You have experience with the most important part, which is
I got the
beautiful,
cakes now.
delicious cakes. Yes, hashtag feed us cake. um, so yeah, if you have any other questions, you can put them down and we'll answer them never. I guess stay tuned for Cole's GoFundMe for a bakery. Otherwise, I think we're basically done here. Thank you everybody, for tuning in today. I think Officer Chat remains our most interactive segment that we do here on Try's Guide. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Special thanks for Cole for taking some time out today to have this conversation. I really appreciate it. Like I said, you're widely respected in the guild as one of the more knowledgeable, more skilled players. So it was really nice to hear from you, and hopefully people can take away some valuable lessons here and use them tonight on Denathrius.
Yeah.
But mostly just in terms of evergreen content that, in a year when we're newly recruiting, getting ready for 9.3, I could probably reference this video for people who had questions, and I think you especially provided some very actionable information. So thank you again. And remember, guys, it's a team sport, and if you have questions, ask. I think if we had to summarize everything we've learned today, is that it's love your fellow raider and don't be afraid to ask. Oh, that's all I got, everybody. I will see Raiders online tonight. I will see everybody else online for Tuesday, where we'll do weekly chores, Destiny and I. Thank you so much, guys. Everybody wave goodbye. See you next
See
time.
you guys.
Bye, guys.